tell me about the recruiting process. I'm curious where you took your officials,
Oh yeah,
and when and how you kind of arrived at Notre Dame.
absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, wow, that was an experience. Um, the whole goal of swimming for me, for my parents, for my family, was to basically introduce or to get me into school, to get an education. Kind of rewinding the clock way, way back to when I was younger. My parents, they got married very young. They had me at a very young age, but they realized the importance of education. And I remember my parents had actually started saving money for me to go to college. Unfortunately, my grandfather, who's no longer with us, he passed away from Parkinson's. He was very sick. And so I remember, every day or every week, every 2 weeks, I would come home and my dad would have this envelope. It was a green envelope, and he would open it up and be like, "Hey, here's like, look at this number. Like, this is how much we're saving for you to go to college." And as a kid, you would see like $2,000 and you'd be like, "Oh my gosh, like I can't even count that high." You know what I mean? And I remember coming home one day, and it was the day where we would look at how much money I had to go to school, to go to college. And I remember, Grandpa was very sick at the time, and my dad told me like, "Hey, like, he broke the news to me. He's like, we had to stop. Um, there is no more money in this account for you to go to school." But the thing that he said to me that was not the end of the story was, but you're still going to school. You know what I mean? You still need to find a way to get into school. And since then, that has been probably one of the biggest motivators for me to, stand out amongst being the recruiters, to stand out to recruiters. Um, I remember, thinking to myself like, man, money's tight. We were not where we are financially, back then.
What
Um,
age was that? What age was that conversation
yeah,
that kind of tied in with your grandfather?
yeah, I was very young at the time. I believe I want to say 8 or 9 at
Okay.
the time. Yep, so very young age. But even that impression of the importance of school, getting an education, that stuff, it sticks with me. It's stuck with me. It's something that I'll carry into, when I have a family of my own. Um, but yeah, so that's been the motivator from essentially day one, and doing what I needed to do in order to become noticeable, to get noticed. Yeah, I was willing to do anything. I remember the recruiting process. It was insane, actually. I don't know if we played by the rules of the book, and I don't know, because it was all so new to us here. But we took a lot of unofficial visits. Money that came out of our own pockets. I remember, if you want a list of visits, we visited Cornell, we visited Princeton, we went to Harvard, to Yale. I mean, we went all over the place, Virginia, whatnot. And those were all unofficially, off the record. The coaches took us in. I got the tour. I got to spend the night, but I never really like. It was never like, this is an official visit. And I did that all my junior year of high school. So I was in school, I was swimming, and I was trying to like travel across the country to go and see all these amazing places. That was really cool. I did love that. Now, when recruiting came along, I will never forget Mike Bottom, University of Michigan head coach, called me 12:01 midnight 01, the day that it was legal for you to call recruits. We actually had to buy a landline because we couldn't get phone calls like on our cell phones during the day. I was in school. My parents really didn't want recruiters calling my personal phone. So we bought a landline, we set it up, and I remember that thing going off 12:01 midnight. "Hey, Tabahn, this is Mike Bottom. Just wanted to be the first one to call." And I was like, oh my gosh, like this is really happening. Um, I took my official visits. I went to the University of Michigan. I went to Virginia, um, University of Virginia. I went to Notre Dame, University of Notre Dame, University of Southern California. And by then I had, and Cal Berkeley. By then I was being recruited by all 5 schools pretty heavily. All of them were offering me, full rides to 90% scholarship there. And it was a great problem to have, sort of like throw a dart and pick one because they're all great schools. You know what I mean? You can't really go wrong. with any of that stuff. But I remember taking a trip to the University of Notre Dame, and I fell in love. I really did. I know it sounds so cheesy and so corny when people are like, this is a place where I felt truly called to me, but it really, really did. And when you look at, the sport of swimming, Notre Dame isn't like I mean, completely frank, it's not like Cal Berkeley. It's not like Texas. Do you know what I mean? It is not Indiana, University of Indiana. It's Notre Dame, but the environment, the people, the fact that I could see myself thriving in a place like that academically, first and foremost. I mean, it's where I ended up. I fell in love with it. So, I'm more than glad, to have gone there. The people that I've met are still my best friends to this day. We talk almost every day.
So when did you settle on that Notre Dame decision?
Oh my gosh, the specific date, I don't know.
We're at just year and month, or was it your junior year? Was all this well established early?
Yep. I remember I wanted to sort of milk the traveling, getting out of school, high school, kind of,
the
ordeal.
USC and Berkeley trips are what you're trying to say.
Exactly.
Yeah, how many times you took to go to California?
Exactly. How many times did Michigan you just get to travel all the way down to California and have it paid for?
Trying to say.
Exactly. Exactly. So I of course I waited till all of the trips were done. And it was one of those moments where you kind of just sit down and you're like, okay, well, which one do you remember the most? Which one stood out to you the most? Which one did you love the most? I won't lie to you. USC was a very, very, very close second. I mean, if you want to talk about gorgeous pools and gorgeous schools, there is
This is the 84 Olympic pool, right? So you're basically like, if I go to USC, I'm going to swim in the 84 Olympic pool all the time. And
the lockers had like this finger, like they were finger coded to just you. So I was like, I mean, it was like a movie. It was like a movie. Very close to that. But ultimately I chose the University of Notre Dame. I remembered, just thinking about, okay, the people that I met there, and here's what's really funny, actually. I don't know if this happens quite a bit, but the people, like the recruiting class that came into the University of Notre Dame that I went with, who were all being recruited, we formed a group chat while we were there because, you want to keep track of where people are. You want to make sure that everyone's, where they're supposed to be, communication, whatever. But that group chat actually stayed active throughout all 4 or 5 of our other recruiting trips. So I had people from all over the place, being recruited from all over the place, coming back to that group chat and sort of talking and being like, hey, this is where I went. What do you think of this place? What do you think of this place? What do you think of this place? I would say about 80% of that group chat committed to the University of Notre Dame. And it was really, really, really cool. Because those are the people that I sort of got along the best with, and I knew that they were going to be there. You cannot go wrong with the University of Notre Dame. I mean, it's a top tier school. It's beautiful. It's gorgeous. I mean, I couldn't be happier with where I ended up,
I mean, can we let's say right off the top here that, because football is such a competitive sport and people have their loves of universities, I know that a lot of people that are watching this are picking up. There's a little The Ohio State University that whenever you refer to Notre Dame, you say the University of Notre Dame. You never say Notre Dame.
Yeah.
You always give me the full
You got to give the proper title. You know what I mean?
I do know what you mean now. I picked that up.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
So your senior year, 43, 88 and 100, a shade faster, 137 flat, which is significantly faster for you, and dip down at juniors, I think, to do that in December your senior year. Went a shade faster in the 53, I think at the state meet on a free relay. Tell me about that senior year and finishing it off.
Yeah.
And I don't want to lead you in a direction here, but one of the things that I've talked to, with some of the guys was, once you're committed and once you know where you're going, and in some ways that senior year can almost feel like an obstacle for
Oh
some
yeah.
swimmers where they are
Oh yeah.
so looking forward to what they know is that next step. Which for you, you've known now for, looking at, the timeline, probably 6 months to a year, that you know that you're going to Notre Dame and kind of wanting to, almost fast forward the clock. Was that a challenge for you your senior year to kind of work
Oh
through
yeah.
that final year at home?
Yeah, that's like, yeah, absolutely. Like when when I was recruited at the time, and they said, we would love to have you. We would love to pay for you to go to school here. You don't have to worry about anything. Uh, I was just like, okay, like, you know what I mean? Like, I mean, it's like you've made it. You know what I mean? You're gonna get an education. You're gonna make friends. This is gonna be the greatest 4 years of your life, arguably some of the greatest 4 years of your life. Um, and so of course, yeah, like senior year, school, I was like, okay, like I'm doing all this, but I'm going to Notre Dame. You know what I mean? Swimming, I was like, I'm doing all this, but I'm going to the University of Notre Dame. But ultimately, at the same time, I was also, mature enough to understand that, like, when you have to do something when you get there. You know what I mean? Like, I can't just throw everything out the window now that I've made it, right? Because they expect you to perform at a level that they're recruiting you to perform at. And so there was a little bit of that, I kick myself in the pants and whatnot, and you know, of course. But I was excited to just get there. Do you know what I mean? Who isn't?
Of course. Before we jump forward, I want to ask you to just kind of look backward from your
Sure.
time at home
Uh-huh.
before you move on to Notre Dame.
Yeah.
What are you most proud of in your accomplishments as kind of a junior swimmer?
Sure.
Before you age up and kind of get into the, that next step. What are you most proud of from the time that you had
Yeah.
west side of Michigan?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think one of the things that, if not the most proud thing that I sort of have taken away from the at-home swim time, was truly developing a genuine passion for sport, for competing. I cannot tell you how many people that I have met, even now, in my own workplace, amongst my own, my friends, who have never really truly experienced passion for something, for anything. They wake up in the morning, they do what they're told to do, or they do what they have to do. But this feeling of like waking up with just this sort of like, I don't really even know how to describe it. This like flame that you get, when you know that you're working towards something that you could be great at. The feeling is undescribable. I mean, there is no other feeling like it. At least I haven't experienced anything like that. You know what I mean? And that's a feeling that I think I'll always be chasing. And that comes from, like you said, the time that I spent here at home. That comes from the coaches that I was surrounded with.
One thing that I want to talk to you about before we get to Notre Dame as well. One of the conversations that I had with Cameron Murphy,
Oh yeah.
I'm sorry, we had
Yeah.
two separate conversations, and one was
Sure.
really simply just focused on swimming. And when we got done with the conversation, I texted him and I said, Camden, I really didn't ask you any questions at all about you being black. I just talked to you about just being a swimmer. And
Yeah.
if I was telling your story, would I be remiss? Should we double back and have some conversations? And he sent me some anecdotes and things that I thought were notable. And he and I wound up about a month ago deciding, let's have a conversation, just the two of us, about
Absolutely.
social issues. And so we kind of set swimming aside, and I posted that in the interview as well. And if people are interested in hearing Camden's thoughts on some of those things that are going on in his life,
Right.
and being down in Athens right now, swimming at Georgia, and kind of what's going on in the South, he had some really interesting insights. But I guess, one of the things that I thought was interesting was I asked him, like how that played in competitively, being different than, a number of his competitors. And he acknowledged that, simply, he was a state champion and like an extremely fast kid from like 10 and unders.
Absolutely.
So he knew that people were always watching him already from an extremely young age. And he didn't really talk about any outward, outward things, but you say, when I think back upon it, there were probably some microaggressions and things that I
Mm-hmm.
noticed along the way that I just kind of like internalized, but nobody was ever really outward with me. But he acknowledged, I'm Camden Murphy.
Yeah.
I may people may be nice to me just
Yeah.
because I'm Camden Murphy,
Yeah.
and the
Exactly.
way that you're
Exactly.
treating me may not be the way that you treat other people. And
Other
it was
people.
very interesting for me to hear his perspective on, kind of how he internalized,
Absolutely.
how he was treated, and just the experience of clearly being different, but he was different in so many ways,
Mm-hmm.
simply just
Mm-hmm.
because he was incredibly fast from the beginning.
Right.
But obviously, that there were other differences with him. And so I guess
Yeah.
how did you internalize being
Yeah.
as a young swimmer?
Absolutely. Yeah. No. As a young swimmer, talking, ages, 6 through 8, is these things that you don't ever really think about. And then as you get older, you start to recognize, even outside of the pool, I'm different. Like I'm different. And not different in a bad way by any means, but I'm just different from the majority of people that I'm surrounded by, and from the majority of the people that I see when I see the sport of swimming. I'm different. It 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 one of the things that I think it did for me at least, was it increased the amount of pressure that I had on myself to perform. I felt like I was performing for not just myself, but for people who looked like me, for people who maybe didn't know how to swim, for people who were given the stereotype, because you're black, you can't swim. Um, I remember one of the most, forefront sort of like eye-opening moments for me was like the I had a reporter from the Detroit Free Press call me and ask me, "Hey, I would love to interview you." I'm like, "Oh, awesome!" And at this point in time, high school, I was getting interviewed pretty frequently, and I thought, this would just be another like, "What's your story?" Sort of explain. We would love to know who you are, and it started off that way, and then it quickly became all about race, and the fact that I was an African American man, I was a minority man, Asian American man, swimming, and how I sort of, you're asking me the question exactly how he asked it, is like, how does this affect you, how does this internalize you, or how have you internalized this, I should say. I cannot tell you how many times people have told me, "Hey, like, you're not supposed to be here, right? Like, this isn't a sport for people who look like you." But then, I compete well, or I compete at the level that I was competing at the time, and they would tell me things like, "Okay, of course, well, of course you would be good at this because it's a sport, and look at you." You know what I mean? Like, you're black. This is something that you should do. And so at a young age, I was caught in this in between of either, I shouldn't be here, or of course I'm doing well because I am the way that I am. And for a while, it did sort of jar my brain, because I wasn't being, I wasn't, my accolades and my accomplishments were not being attributed to the hard work that I put into the sport. It was being attributed to the pigmentation of my skin. And it took a while for me to sort of break free of that sort of mentality, that sort of thinking. That was just, the people that I was surrounded with, the environment that I was surrounded with. High school, right? Kids in high school, they can be jerks. But my personality, being it what it is, it's sort of something that I would, laugh off and be like, yeah, like, just don't pay it any attention. But when I go to sleep at night, it's like, oh man, like, that bothered me. Do you know what I mean? Like, that keeps me up at night. Ultimately, it fueled a lot of things that I did in the sport. A lot of the things that, when people would tell me, "You shouldn't be here, you can't do this," it was always nice to go 43.9, look at them in the stands, and give them a wink. Do you know what I mean? It was always nice to have that sort of like, "But I'm here." And so, I guess, to answer your question more directly, the way that I've internalized being different, or being a minority in a predominantly white sport, it's made me proud. I don't like to be, proud of many things, but it's made me proud to say that, I have my footprint here, And I'm, my back is here for the next person to step on moving forward. You know what I mean?
Was that camp that you went to, the diversity camp that you referred to, did that include any tool building for this? Were you able to talk to some mentors and maybe some people that could help you get in the right headspace? Was that part of that training and that opportunity?
Absolutely. The camp was that camp was I would say, for it being the first time that I'd ever done something like that, it was less of like, it was extremely difficult, but the focus was not necessarily just on swimming. If you can kind of sort of catch my drift. I was surrounded by other athletes who were all minorities. My coaches were minorities. The people who came and talked to us, minorities. So, Simone came and talked to us. You know what I mean? Extraordinary. Right? These are like these interactions. It was this exposure to like, we understand that like this sport is different. You will feel different here. You know what I mean? But you guys are so gifted and so talented. You know what I mean? It would be such a shame and a waste for that sort of feeling to squander or crush any sort of potential that you would have because you look different. So yeah, I mean that camp was awesome. I love that camp. It was. I mean, I have a lot of good friends that I still talk to, who are from that camp. So it was a good time. It was a really good time, actually.
Sure.
Yeah.
So then you move on to the university.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Looking at, the full picture of your accomplishments, I certainly think that 42.86, 100 freestyle that got you a runner-up finish at your conference meet, an Olympian, is pretty good. And obviously looks nice. 135.4, so you were able to come down from that 137 in high school and dip all the way into 135. Eventually broke 20 in the 50s. So certainly some improvement there and some things to be able to look back on. When you look back at the totality of your time in South Bend, kind of that same question I asked you to talk about earlier about looking back at 18 and unders. When you look at what you accomplished at Notre Dame, what are you most proud of there?
Absolutely, without a doubt. First and foremost, the people that I've met, the friendships that I've made. I cannot emphasize enough how awesome it is to be able to call some of those people that I've met, brothers and sisters of my own. They're awesome. They're really good. But strictly looking at a swimming perspective, that meet that you're talking about, the ACC meet, I swam and I came runner-up 42. That 100 freestyle.
That would have been probably 2017, I believe, your sophomore year.
Yep, sophomore year. That was probably the coolest moment in my swimming career. Mainly because Ryan Held and I are friends. We're good friends. We josh back and forth. I remember, before, this was really the only time that this is the first time that I had introduced myself to him, seen him, got a picture of him in my head. And I remember telling him, we were talking back and forth, and I remember telling him, like, I'm coming for you. Like, I'm gonna, like, you better swim fast, because if you don't, like, I'm going to be right there behind you. And he did end up beating me. I give it to him. Props to him. He is the gold medalist. But I remember, thinking to myself, even after that race, like, man, that I gave that my all. Like, I gave that my all. And I mean, I remember like barely being able to pull myself out of the pool. It was one of those moments where I look back on and I'm like, I really you took a shot at the king and you tried to, you freaked him out a little bit. It was a year later. He told me, he's like, Tabahn, after that swim, we, NC State guys, we went to the locker room and we wrote your name on the board and we circled it. And because, we were like, this is one of the guys that we have to keep an eye out for. And, that sort of thing, like that sort of stuff, it makes me happy. It makes me proud. You know what I mean? To say that I sort of like, I was here, you know what I mean? Like I did that thing. So yeah, I still have that medal for sure. It's a great experience. Great story.
going back to the very beginning of our conversation, you
Yeah.
said you dipped into the water when you were 5 or 6 years old, and you really
Mhm.
never came out, with the
Yeah.
exception maybe a couple months where you told dad you wanted to quit, and
Yep.
like you figured it out that you
Yep.
did. So, based on our conversation, I'm led to believe that there was about 17 years in the water and a couple months out. And
Correct.
so tell me how the last 18 months have been
Mhm.
since, like swimming became a lesser priority in your
Oh
life,
yeah.
option of whether you wanted to go swim. Do
Oh
you want
yeah.
to be in the water right now? Tell me about kind of extracting yourself from a sport you poured yourself into for 16,
Absolutely.
17 years has gone.
When you do something for as long as, yeah, I've done some swimming for as long as, most people in my shoes have swam for, swimming becomes less of a sport and it becomes more of a sort of, it becomes, sort of who you are. Borderline therapeutic. Um I cannot tell you how many times, like, just being underwater, that sound of no sound is probably one of the most calming things that I have ever experienced. You know what I mean? It's a place where you can think. It's a place where you can, you know, get out any sort of aggressions that you may have had throughout the day. It's the place where you can relax. I mean, it's just swimming. I mean, I owe a lot of who I am today because of swimming. Um, I remember when I graduated from college, I finished, the final meet of the season. I had one of those moments where it was like, I'm done. Like, we did it. You know what I mean? It's like 2 months go by, and you're like, I'm having the time of my life. I don't have to wake up at 5 a.m. I can eat whatever I want. Like, I can go to bed whenever I want. You know what I mean? And then it sort of seeps in, like, something is missing again. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's a piece of you that is missing. Um, I talk a lot of too. I have a really good teammate of mine, Matt Grossless, who we go back and forth all the time, and it is like we we basically describe the feeling that we miss from swimming. I think one of the things that I miss the most about that sport is that moment that every athlete has, but I can only really describe it from a swimming standpoint. That moment that every swimmer has, right? Where, you're behind the block, your goggles are on, and everything, it just almost seems surreal. You can feel your heart beating, you can feel your stomach, you can feel your toes, you feel the hairs on your body. I mean, this sort of like out of body competitive, feeling that you get before you jump in there and just give it your all. I mean, that fire that you get, um eh, it's one of those feelings that, like, I just struggle to replicate now without swimming. Do you know what I mean? I try to apply because I know it's there. I know it's there. I felt it more times than I can remember. But is there anything when I look around to sort of take sort of that, like, that fire and put it into? I have a job now, right? So I have a career. It pays well. It's an amazing job. You know what I mean? But, like, if I brought that into the workplace, I feel like people would be scared of me. Do you know what I mean? So it's like I have this tool. I have this, like, this raw energy that I just know how to use as, like, this competitive weapon almost. And where I sit right now, I have nowhere to put it. Um, that's not to say that I like swimming is not an option for me still. I will absolutely hop back in the pool anytime. It's just, life happens and you get busy. Like I said, I have a career. Coronavirus does not make anything easier in terms of going outside, but yeah, no, I to answer your question very directly, I absolutely miss the sport of swimming. I miss it. I miss it like an old lover. You know what I mean? It's just one of those things where it's like, she was right there, and I just wish she was here still. You know what I mean?